Today on BRStv Investigates, it's Red Sea ReefLED's turn at our LED lighting PAR and spectrum testing gauntlet. Hi, Randy with BRStv Investigates, experimenting on our own tanks so you don't have to experiment on yours. I have to say that I'm pretty excited to see how this Reef LED will perform since it's Red Sea's first foray into LED lighting option, and I have a feeling it will do pretty well. We've tested several LEDs in this 90-watt range, some with a similar approach to light spread that Red Sea took that places multiple light diodes under a larger single lens, and others with individual LEDs, each with their own lens but clustered together. So it will be really interesting to see how the Red Sea Reef LED will compare to those options. From a cost standpoint, at $350, this light represents one of the lowest cost lighting options in its class, and I'm interested to see how it stacks up. In the end, I'm particularly interested in how Red Sea's use of 80 watts of Reef spec blue LEDs coupled with 10 watts of 8000K white LEDs, all housed under a single large lens, will perform as a viable light energy source capable of sustaining corals' metabolic functions, but also how it makes the corals and entire tank package look, and if it gives me a tank I can brag about to my friends. Let's go ahead and dive right into it today by looking at the Red Sea Reef LED from 3 angles, much like we've done in the past, starting with coral health and how the Reef LED 90 serves its utilitarian purpose of providing an adequate source of energy and PAR for corals' metabolic needs and photosynthesis, by looking at overall PAR on how that PAR is distributed, and finally, what the Reef LED offers in spectrum. Our focus for these tests revolve specifically around a PAR range for a tank filled with higher demand SPS corals, because if a light is capable of sustaining PAR level for these higher demand types of corals, it can absolutely sustain lower light corals like LPS and softies. That range we aim for is within the 250 to 350 PAR average throughout as much of the tank as possible, which we explored and from all angles in our video, How Much PAR for SPS Corals. So starting with a single Reef LED 90 mounted at a height of 8.5 inches from the surface of the water, which is the recommended height from the Red Sea manual and super easy to achieve with the fixed Reef LED mounting arm, we place the light on a 24-inch by 24-inch 60-gallon cube. We'll take PAR measurements across a 36-point grid at depths of 6, 12, and 18 inches below the water surface using Red Sea's 15 Kelvin preset, which is both blue and white channels at 100%. At a depth of 6 inches below the water surface, we're seeing an average PAR across 36 points at 191 total PAR, which overall shows a very uniform spread from directly under the center of light out to the edges of the tank, and is actually a higher average PAR than any of the LEDs we've previously tested around the 90-watt output when set to intensity and spectrum ranges that reefers actually use. Directly in the center, we see an average PAR of 302, followed by 212 in the middle, and an outer ring of 156, which is only a change of 48% from the center to the outer ring at a super shallow depth of 6 inches, and again is less of a change than any similar light we tested thus far, and really showcases how using a group of LEDs housed under a single lens can help reduce PAR hotspots and provide even PAR within its usable footprint. Moving down to a depth of 12 inches under the surface of the water, there's an ultra-flat PAR spread of 169 average with slightly lower PAR towards the back of the tank due to it being painted black. In the center ring, we have an average PAR of 174, an average of 182 in the middle, and 160 on the outer edges. I'd venture to guess that the middle ring is ever so slightly higher, as it's probably refracted light from the edges of the tank back to the center, but all in all there's only a change of 22 PAR across all 3 rings, and one of the best performances we've seen. Finally, at a measurement depth of 18 inches and an average PAR of 149, we've only dropped 20 PAR from the 12-inch measurement, and again, we see an ultra-flat spread within 150 in the center, 153 in the middle, and 147 on the outer ring with just a variance of 6 PAR. Again, even at these depths, compared to every other LED fixture we've tested in this wattage range so far, the Red Sea Reef LED 90 ended up being the highest PAR output overall, demonstrating what can be achieved with a tight LED grouping under one single lens. So using our 250 to 350 PAR range for an SPS dominant tank, I'd say that on this 24-inch by 24-inch cube, the single Reef LED is just a bit shy. However, on smaller tanks or shallower tanks, it absolutely will achieve those results. Red Sea themselves echo this sentiment with their recommendations for using a single Reef LED 90 on their Red Sea Reefer 170, which has a slightly smaller footprint than a 60-gallon cube at 24.5 by 20 by 20 inches. I can definitely see how a single fixture on that size tank would be more adequate for a tank with high demand SPS, more dispersed throughout wider area of the tank from top to bottom. Moving on to par distribution with multiple Reef LEDs placed over a 2 foot by 4 foot 120 gallon tank in configurations of 2, 3, 4 fixtures and mounted at the same 8.5 inches off the water surface. In these configurations we'll get a better idea of par distribution, as the use of multiple lamps, specifically on larger systems, is more common for full-blown SPS reef tanks, which has significant differences over a single lamp, particularly when looking at where the lights intersect and cause increased par. Starting with 2 LEDs spaced evenly across the length of the 4-foot tank and at 6 inches under the water surface, we can see a par distribution pattern that resembles 2 individual lamps with 2 distinct areas of higher par that maintain a peak between them and evenly drop off on all 4 sides out to the outer edges. There's an inner par ring of 356 followed by a middle average of 234 and an outer ring at 128. For the first time, we see the par drop below 100 in the extreme corners, which is very similar to other lights we've tested where they are focused down instead of out. However, seemingly less so here, even with the light recessed inside the light housing, which is very surprising. At a depth of 12 inches underwater, there's more even uniform par distribution with some varying degrees of higher and lower par where the lights and their reflections off the glass intersect. There's an average par overall of 185 with 235 in the center, 193 in the middle, and 155 on the outside edges. And notice how as we get deeper, it actually gets brighter. Finally, with 2 lamps at 18 inches, there's super flat distribution, which isn't surprising, with 168 total average par with only an average difference of just 24 par from the outer ring at 156 to the inner ring at 180. Let's see what happens with 3 lamps on a 2 foot by 4 foot tank with an average par of 305 throughout the tank at 6 inches under the surface of the water. We can definitely see a pretty wide area of significant higher par in the upper 300s to 500s in a couple of places. Other than the outside edge, we also see that almost all the points are in that 250 to 350 range across the entire tank. But again, the inner ring where nearly all the light from 3 fixtures are intersecting, we see a range from 400 par and up. At 12 inches, we have a total average of 278, still in that SPS dominant tank range, with more even distribution overall that shows 329 average in the center and 282 in the middle and 251 in the outer perimeter. And lastly, with 3 lamps at 18 inches, we're still mostly in that SPS target range with an average of 248 throughout the entire tank. The distribution is pretty awesome at this depth, with only a 12 par difference between the outside ring at 242 and both middle and inside rings each at 254. I'd say that this is exactly what we're looking for an SPS dominant tank, and I'd feel pretty darn comfortable using 3 Reef LED 90s to do that on a standard 4 foot 120 gallon system. This configuration is hands down both more par and more even distribution with less defined hotspots than previous fixtures we've tested. Okay, last up for par distribution is 4 lamps, and right off the bat, I'll say that after seeing this last configuration performance, I won't be surprised at some of the higher numbers we'll see when we add another Reef LED 90. That in mind, my takeaway here would be that even if you had an SPS dominant tank, you'd likely run this setting at about 20% less intensity, but with 4 lamps, you'll likely see less shadowing and more dispersed spread of the light with the increased intersection points and total coverage. So looking at 4 lamps, all at the 100% blue and white channel, at a depth of 6 inches, we have a par of 400 in total with a pretty high 605 right in the center where the lights overlap each other. The next step down at 12 inches shows us a very well dispersed high par area of 359 total average. This time all 3 averages of the center, middle, and outside edges are all above 325, with the majority of the center still in that 400 plus range. At the final 18 inches down, we have an average of 318 par. Not surprising here is that nearly each point at this depth is still in the mid to upper 200s and up. Like I said earlier, this is something you'll probably end up turning down if you use 4 lamps on a tank this size for more even distribution, which will likely result in more natural growth patterns from SPS colonies and less mortality from shading underneath. Let's wrap up the coral health section with a look at the Reef LED's spectrum offering. First, let's compare the differences between the 3 spectrum color choices that Red Sea provides in what they offer as Reef Spec and Reef Safe spectrums. Red Sea coined Reef Spec for their approach to identifying specific parameters that are necessary for coral life support in reef aquariums, which in Red Sea ReefLED's case refers to lighting, spectrum, and intensity. They added to that term Reef Safe, which for the Reef LED is what provides reefers the ability to make a wide variety of adjustments to intensity and spectrum, but does so with just a handful of options that reduce the possibility of user error that could potentially cause more harm than good. The Reef Safe spectrums Red Sea offers are a 15,000 Kelvin representation of both blue and white channels set to 100%, a 20,000 Kelvin representation where the blues remain at 100 while the whites are set to 50%, and finally 23,000 Kelvin with the blues at 100 and whites at 10. Here their blue channel refers to a blend of blue, violet, and UV LEDs which on their own create a proprietary wavelength that Red Sea has dubbed Reef Spec Blue. With all 3 of these settings utilizing 100% of the blue LEDs, we see nearly identical spectrum from the UV 380s to about 480. From 480 on, there's pretty similar spectrum between the 15K and 20K, however almost no green, yellow, and red in the 23K setting. To give you some frame of reference for how this spectrum offering compares to one of the historical gold standards of reef tank lighting, we placed the 15K Reef LED spectrum over an ATI Blue Plus T5 bulb spectrum, and you can see that the Red Sea Reef LED does have more representation in the 380 to 400 range, yet doesn't seem to provide as wide of spectrum band in the 400 to 490 range. Overall, this is one of the narrowest spectrum peaks we've seen in the similar class LEDs. It's hard to say how this will affect metabolic health, but will likely show itself somewhat more in limited color representation. Red Sea shared with us that they intentionally created the spectrum peak this way to maximize the amount of spectrum around one of the most effective spectrums for corals and zooxanthellae. Now we'll take a look at spectrum blending for how a single recessed lens blends the white and Reef Spec Blue LEDs together cohesively in the tank. In this area, I do expect some pretty high level performance from this fixture. First, because as we've seen with other LED fixture options with a single lens, lighting a tank in this fashion seems to blend the spectrum together nearly perfectly. We'll look at this first from a static standpoint with the Reef LED 90 mounted 19 inches above a 9-point grid in air to get a visual representation of any changes to spectrum from the center to the outside edges of the tank. As you can see, there are only the most subtle changes to spectrum as we move around the 9 testing points and what I would call nearly perfect blending. Again, somewhat easy to do with 2 LED color channels and a single lens. Moving on to a more dynamic look at spectrum blending to see how the spectrum blending is maintained with the addition of water surface agitation for a more honest representation of how it will act in an actual reef tank. There are more subtle changes in the 380 to 420 ranges as well as the 500 to 620. However, again, a better performance compared to other lights we've tested. Also worth noting is how the peak at around 450 and the width of the band between 430 and 480 remain unchanged. Again, a single lens with 2 LED colors create a shimmer that's uniformly blended with no individual colors shooting around the tank. Getting to visual appeal next with how these lights make our corals in the complete tank display look. Frankly, next to an LED fixture's ability to serve its utilitarian purpose of providing energy for coral growth and metabolic function, it simply has to make the tank and corals in my home or office look awesome. For visual appeal, we'll look at coral pop, contrast and sense of depth, shimmer, dimming, lunar lights, and the overall physical appeal. Starting with coral pop, I will say that for those fixtures that use multiple varieties of diode colors outside of blue, violet, and UV in their spectrum offering, their ability to showcase the coral's natural fluorescence has been known to be more expansive than those that simply offer just blue and white. Whether or not each individual color spectrum and the ability to adjust them is beneficial for the coral is likely up for some debate. Red Sea stays true with their goal of providing what they feel is ultimately best for the coral health and function, so with Reef LED 90, there's less of a range for color adjustments that reefers can use to make the corals look more appealing to the eye and more focus on color choices that grows corals. That said, I placed the Reef LED over Ryan's Softy LPS and SPS tanks, each with Red Sea's Reef Safe preset settings of 15, 20, and 23K to get an idea of how this light makes the corals pop. At 15K, we can definitely see highlights in the greens and blues and some of the purples, however the reds and oranges don't seem to pop out as much. At 20K with less emphasis on the whites and blues still at 100%, we really notice a difference in the way the greens and blues pop, but again, less so in the orange and red colors. Finally, at 23K, there's undeniably a ton of pop in those corals with greens and light blues. I would say that personally this setting is a bit too much blue for me to set for an entire photo period throughout the day, but it would make a great choice for those sunrise and sunset times of day. In terms of contrast and sense of depth, I personally feel that a tank that has a balance between light and dark areas without looking overly flat really makes the tank and coral look amazing and stand out. As many of us have seen with T5 only tanks, although you get a great light coverage, diffusion and color, there's really no sense of depth, shadows or movement. Here I think metal halides have been the gold standard for many years in the hobby. However, now with LEDs, due to their small form factor, we can pretty much bank on the fact that nearly all of the fixtures available will be able to provide this contrast to the tank, and the Reef LED 90 is definitely one of them. Closely tied to that is shimmer, and I think almost all reefers who have seen a wide variety of LED shimmer could almost universally agree that using a single lens for all LEDs produces the best, most natural looking shimmer with wide bands of caustic lines without any sharp or abrasive looking color separation shimmer effect. To my eye, the Reef LED shimmer lines seem to be a bit wider than other similar single lens options, and I do catch the occasional separate white shimmer line, which to me gives this sense of being more like what you could find in the natural ocean. What we don't see here are any signs of a disco ball static effect or visual color separation, and in those regards, this fixture performs awesome. As far as dimming goes, there's really only two choices here, with a blue channel that controls the Reef Spec blue blend of UV, violet, and blue LEDs, and a white channel for the 8000K representation of white LEDs. These can be dimmed down to 1% for a sunrise to sunset effect over the tank, which is automatically enabled when you first set up the light and can be adjusted to your own personal intensity preference. Adding to that is moonlight, or the lunar cycle effect that's built into the ReefBeat app. With a toggle of this feature to on, Reef LED will automatically start waxing and waning moon cycle that's based on 28 days with varying degrees of intensity, which is a pretty cool feature for enjoying your tank after the photo period day. And many reefers believe that with proper utilization of a lunar feature like this could induce coral or fish spawning in the tank. But in a tank environment, it's tough to know if there's a ring of truth to that or not. I personally think lunar lights look cool, and it's a feature that I would use. Lastly, for our look at visual appeal is what the light fixture itself looks like and how it complements the complete tank package look. This is one area where Red Sea really dominates many of its competitors, specifically in areas like the tanks and stands themselves. When looking at this light with the Reef LED mounts, I'd say that I find them very attractive and fitting right in line with other Red Sea products they produce, and at less than 5 inches by 5 inches by 2 inches, still relatively a small footprint when compared to other 90-watt range fixtures. Okay, so I was initially concerned about how the recessed LED cluster might affect how the light looks in the tank, but I was very surprised to see how well it performed in par distribution above its peers, and actually for me turns out to be a fantastic feature that not only reduces light spillage into the room, but visually keeps the light inside the tank and not in my eyes. The last component we'll discuss today is the available features with the Reef LED, although not what I would consider to be the most important part of choosing an LED, but for a gear junkie like me who loves equipment that has bells and whistles I can show off to my friends, available features are part of what drives my final decision of one light over another, and in this instance, we're looking at mounting options, controllability, intuitive modes, compatibility, build quality, and quiet operation. For some reefers, mounting options may make or break the deal when it comes to what fits on or above the tank. I personally like the clamp-on style mount, which currently is the only option we were able to get our hands on for this series of tests. However, this assumes that you are using the lights on a rimless tank, as I don't see a way you could securely mount them to those with a rim. According to their site, they do have a hanging pendant option for the Reef LED 90s that comes in black and white and in lengths that cover tanks from 30 inches to 72 inches. As for the mounting arm there are available in 3 sizes depending on the front to back width of your tank, with a range of up to 3/4 of an inch thick. So with the arms that Red Sea sent us for 21.5 to 24.5 inches, ended up mounting the lights directly in the center of our 24-inch 60-gallon cube and our 24 by 48-inch 120-gallon tank. These mounting arms look to be made of some very rigid aluminum, which gives the entire package nice, clean 90-degree lines. And my favorite feature of all is that the arms swing up and out of the way when I need to get in all parts of the tank. This is definitely a feature I wish more manufacturers would look to add to their own mounting options. Let's talk about controllability next, with the launch of Red Sea's ReefBeat app to control the Reef LEDs that have a built-in Wi-Fi connection to tie your lights to your home or office router or internet. Setup through the app is super simple, as Red Sea designed it around their best practice guidelines for lighting spectrum with 3 preset color choices, and photo period, which defaults to an 11-hour lighting day with an hour sunrise and an hour sunset. You can go into the scheduler and make changes if you needed to, but short of turning down overall intensity, turn on a lunar cycle or acclimation mode, or play around with the cloud feature, I really wouldn't see a need to. Up next are intuitive modes, and I think that this is really where the Reef LED shines in the features department. The entire thought process behind the Reef LED is around the sole purpose of providing a proper source of light energy on all fronts of spectrum, intensity, and total photo period. It doesn't get more intuitive than being able to plug the light in, choose a color I think looks good for my tank and corals, choose a sunrise time for the lights to come on, and walk away. As for the build quality of these lights, I'd say that's pretty straightforward, with a larger area under the LED heatsink that allows the single lens to be recessed as far as possible while maintaining a slim 2-inch thick profile. Opening the light up, we see that it's really a large heatsink with a motherboard stacked on top of itself, likely to conserve space. The thickness of the fans really stuck out to me, as we know the more surface area there is, the more efficiently it will be cooled, which also lends itself to less of a need for the fan to operate as frequently or at high speeds, which leads us to quiet operation. Although it may not be the quietest piece of equipment on my tank, I can say that the larger heatsink and ventilation system on all 4 sides definitely lends its hand at making the Reef LED a super quiet fixture where I wouldn't notice it over any other piece of equipment on my tank. All in all, I think Red Sea has created a light that is absolutely comparable to competitor fixtures in the same size and output range, particularly as it relates to overall par output capability and the reduced likelihood that you could cause harm to your tank by not having the keys to every color in the rainbow without specific advice and guidance on how to use it properly. I can definitely see how Red Sea's approach to creating a truly reef-safe, set-it-and-forget-it type of fixture is attractive. This type of plug-and-play ease is what has always drawn me to lighting technologies like T5 and metal halides, where I simply plug them into the wall and they produce an awesome reef tank, and I honestly think that Red Sea's on the right path in this aspect. From the looks of the example tanks Red Sea shows on the Reef LED website, I have no doubts they will not only grow coral, but will do so in a way that will make them absolutely a desirable LED fixture to contend with, specifically when you compare their current cost of $350 versus other fixtures in that 90-watt output range, where the Reef LED comes out as the most cost-effective option. From a par standpoint, the Reef LED definitely packs more punch than other fixtures we've tested in a similar class. This conversation about the right amount of par for SPS comes from a combination of both theoretical and practical knowledge on reef keeping from scientists, their experiments and data, backed with their supporting evidence and the practical experiences of hobbyists themselves, and worth checking out in our episode, What's the Best Par for SPS, at the link over here. We'll see you next time on BRStv Investigates.